Let's dive right in and start a full stack JavaScript application from scratch. Make new directory, advanced React. The reason I'm going to start from scratch here is that I want you to understand all the elements that play any role in a data-driven, production-ready React application. This means understanding every configuration we're going to add and every command we're going to run. So we're not going to use a pre-configured environment with tools like Create React App, for example. This is a great option to begin a React project and prototype something really quick, but it abstracts a lot of things that you should learn how to do and learn about why they're needed and learn about what other options you have. If you're comfortable configuring a full stack React application, feel free to skip this clip and sync with the GitHub repo for the next clip. The directory that we just created will host our React application. We'll put all the code related to that under a lib directory. This lib directory is going to be shared between the server and the client, as we're going to do server-side rendering for this app. Eventually, we're going to create multiple nodes for our production application and balance the load on them somehow. But every node will be a web server to begin with. Every server node will serve static content and public assets. The public assets will contain the React application, so we'll make a directory for public assets as well. We'll start things out with a server.js file under the lib directory. We'll configure an Express application in there. To start depending on packages like Express, we need to initialize this project as a node project and have a package.json file to document all the dependencies like Express. Yarn init will do that task for us. Answer the few questions here. Let's change the entry point to libserver.js. I'll also add the GitHub repo for this project. You can skip that step on your end. Author info, license, and we now have a starting point for the package.json file. Launch your favorite editor on this directory. And let's have a really quick word about editors. If you're using Vim, Emacs, Atom, or Sublime, you're good to go. Forward about 1 minute from this point. If, on the other hand, you're using something like WebStorm or VS Code or any other fancy IDE with fancy features, you might want to consider downgrading for this project. I don't have anything against those editors, but I think they add unnecessary and distracting noise around your workflow. This is just my personal opinion. However, no matter what editor you use, I want you to make sure that you can integrate ESLint with it. I can't say enough about the importance of having ESLint integrated in your editor. I like to see any ESLint errors on save. Instead of me discovering those errors a few seconds later in server logs or a browser console, ESLint will save you that time. So it's just that simple. If you don't have ESLint, you're simply wasting some time. ESLint is so important, it is going to be the first thing I configure in this project. Bring in a local ESLint with yarn add --div ESLint. ESLint is a development dependency. Then you need to bring in an ESLint configuration file. Now you have a lot of options there. You can use the ESLint command itself with --init. And ESLint is going to ask you a few questions there. So you can configure your ESLint with simple questions or using a popular style guide like Google's or Airbnb's. However, we need a style guide that understands modern JavaScript syntax, like, for example, class properties. That's why I just use the recommended settings with the Babel ESLint parser, and I also add the React plugin and a few other personal customizations. If you want to use my exact configuration, it's part of my .file repo on GitHub. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and take this configuration, and we're going to add it under our project as .eslint_rc.js. Since we're using a React plugin for ESLint and Babel ESLint, we need to bring in these dependencies. So yarn dev ESLint plugin React, this is the React plugin, and also Babel ESLint itself. So go ahead and install these two dev dependencies. And after you do that, make sure you test your ESLint configuration. So let's place a console log statement in here. Make sure that ESLint is configured correctly. Let's drop a semicolon, and here you go. ESLint is giving me hints that I have some problems. So it's extremely important that you get this instant feedback when you have problems in your code. Okay, we're now ready to start our Express server web application. So we're going to bring in Express as a dependency. We're also going to use EJS for minimal template work on the server side when we start rendering our React application from the server. Those are the two main production dependencies. And we'll start a very simple Express application right away. In server.js, we need to bring in Express, and we need to initialize an application. And we can do that by just invoking the Express function. And then we need to use Express static middleware to serve the public directory. And we'll go ahead and listen to a port here to run the Express application. However, instead of hard coding a port here, we should use a configuration variable here. I'm going to call it config.port. And I'll go ahead and import this configuration from, say, require. We'll go ahead and place it on the same level. So config.js, and we'll create config.js. And config.js is simply going to export those configurations. So the first configuration we just use is the port. We'll try to read it from the process first. And if there is no variable in the process, we'll go ahead and use something hard-coded, just like that. And we'll pass in a function here for the listen handler. So we'll call it listen handler. This is a function. And in here, we can just console info that we are running on this port. All right, we'll go ahead and test that just by running node lib server.js. And I'm listening on port 8080. So now let's go ahead and prepare our slash endpoint. So when I go to the slash, what do you want me to do here? So do the request response callback here, and we'll just render the index template. Now this is a template that needs to exist in the EJS templates. So we'll create a new folder here, top level views. This is the default folder where EJS is looking for template. So under views, we'll create a new file, call it index.ejs. And then here, let's just put a standard HTML template. We also need to configure Express to use EJS as its template language. And we do that using this line, app.set view engine is EJS. And I just realized there's a typo here, so it's public. So we've got the public directory that is statically served. So anything we put inside the public directory will be served directly. And we have EJS template, so we can render certain templates like the index template in this example. We can also pass variables here to the template. So let's go ahead and test that. We'll pass a test variable here and make sure that you can use it from index.ejs. So if everything worked correctly, I should see this h2 with the value of answer. Let's go ahead and test that. Restart the node command and go to localhost 8080. And things are working as expected. Okay, since I need to restart my node server every time I make a change, I'm going to go ahead and bring in a library to help me with that. This library is PM2. Now, when we take this project to production, PM2 will also help us a lot there in, for example, rendering a cluster instead of a single node and for zero downtime restarts and other things. So we'll prepare a script in package.json under the scripts section. And in here, we'll do dev pm2 start lib/server.js --watch. And now we can start the server with yarn dev. This will start the PM2 process in the background. And I can check the logs for the process if I want to using yarn pm2 logs. So we'll go ahead and test that the watcher is working by changing server.js. And if we do that, you'll see change detected here, and the server was restarted. The green logs here are the logs coming from the app, while the blue lines here are the logs coming from the PM2 process itself. So usually we're going to focus on the green lines when we're monitoring the logs for our application. Okay, we have one last configuration task to do server side. We are going to use Babel. The reason we're going to introduce Babel here is because our server side will eventually need to render a React application. And we're going to use JSX in our React application. So we need the server side to understand the JSX syntax as well. So if we have Babel, we can write our require syntax like these with the import syntax instead. So I'll go ahead and make sure that we can do that by converting these two lines into the import syntax. When I do that now, my server is not going to work because Node does not understand the import syntax yet. So we need Babel to make Node understand the import syntax. But we'll also configure Babel to understand the JSX syntax as well, so that when it's time, our server will be ready to render JSX content. So to configure Babel, we can add a Babel key in package.json. And in that Babel key, we need the presets key. And we need 3 presets. We need the React preset, we need the env preset, and I'm going to go ahead and add stage 2 so that we get to use features like class properties, which are on their way to become part of the language, but with Babel, we can use them today. To make these presets work, we need to bring in a few dependencies. Yarn add Babel CLI. This is the first dependency that gives me Babel node. And by the way, I need to change my PM2 configuration to tell PM2 to use Babel node instead of regular node, and we can do that with the -- interpreter option, just telling it to use Babel node instead of node. The other dependencies that I need are the presets. So we need Babel preset React, Babel preset env, and Babel preset stage 2. Now, notice how I made these dependencies production dependencies and not development dependencies, because eventually I want to push my source code into a production server, and I want to compile the production-ready code on that server itself instead of generating that code locally and pushing compiled code somehow through source control. Now, this totally depends on your production flow, the way you deploy your production-ready application. But having Babel as a production dependency here and just pushing the source code as is to production and then invoking a Babel command on production to compile source code to something production-ready is probably the easiest way. So we're going to go with that here. Okay, so now we can test what we did so far because we have import statements. So things should work with Babel now. So restart the PM2 process and start it again with yarn dev. And I'll go ahead and yarn PM2 logs as well to make sure I don't see any errors, and I don't see any errors. The server is running, and I now have the capabilities of Babel in my server node. In the next clip, we'll take this further and configure the client side with a simple React application.